Warning, this podcast has stories of real-life events and true crime that happens every day. These stories may contain adult language and graphic or disturbing details not suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
132 in Bush, I've got him at gunpoint. Check the left over, we're going to pull evacuation out this side. They're pulling them out.
10-1-1, advise ready for camp.
God!
Another episode of War Stories. I'm Tom,
and I'm Chuck.
And we are actually. Should we tell people when we are recording this? Because we've got a busy day ahead. It's already been a busy day of work.
I don't think that. Yes, let's do it. But we're going to get to a point where I don't think that we're going to be able to figure out when one's dropping and when one's not, because, folks, we've gotten really, really busy.
Really busy. And we're recording a lot of stuff ahead of time. In advance, because of our producers making us be a little more efficient in our scheduling. But we are actually recording this. We have 3 shows to do today. And so by the time you hear this episode, we'll have done 2 of them.
Yeah, and by the time Locker Room airs,
yes,
because I think that one's happening today, which we're living in the future right now. But that one. That's going to be spicy for sure.
Yeah,
so stay tuned.
This is actually, we're recording this on November 5th at 4 p.m. Pacific time. So the election results are starting to roll in. We have no idea. We have not looked at anything. So we won't be referencing that. But no, don't reference it. We can't reference it. This is it will be dry pie by the time anybody listens to it. Like
it's true. It's true.
So we can't talk about it. But what we can talk about is our guest for this week. And Chuck, you have all the information on this week's guest, do you not?
I do. Absolutely. We have Bill Fraas. He runs Code 33 Consulting. He's CEO and managing consultant. He's a police captain, retired. He served 27 years, and he started his career in Sausalito, California, police department over there. Before being named acting police chief, he unfortunately had to medically retire or got injured, and after 27 years of honorable service, I guess that was
retired. So, Bill, welcome to the show. Did you retire? Or did you have to medically retire?
I was medically retired.
Okay.
I was still 3 years away from regular retirement, but an injury that I actually suffered 20-something years prior that never went away and just got worse and worse. Just resurfaced this 2 months after I got named acting chief, and then I had to retire.
Oy.
Wow, that's rough.
He
has a laundry list, Tom, of everything this man is. I think he's done every job on the department. He's also a graduate at FBI's National Academy. He has a master's degree in criminal justice, specializing in law enforcement management, terrorism, homeland security. He also holds a bachelor's degree in occupational studies, vocational arts, that is related to emergency services, and he holds an administration of justice AS degree. He has well over 5,000 hours of law enforcement. He authored a book on leadership in law enforcement, 10 key traits and what law enforcement agencies can do to develop these in the future for future leaders. That is insane. That is
yellow
amazing.
brick. I see your yellow brick.
Back there.
I never got one. I was not fortunate enough or important enough to go, but I worked with many a good cop who had that same yellow brick on their bookcase behind them, just as you do.
Best 10 weeks of my career.
Oh yeah,
that's awesome.
I've never heard anybody say anything bad about the National Academy. I've heard plenty of cops say things bad about the FBI, but not about the National Academy.
I've only had one person say something bad about it, and they were kicked out. And that was the only reason why.
Well, that would be bad.
That was
Wait. Before we get into your episode, how do you get kicked out of the FBI's National Academy?
Usually it were 2 things: drunken behavior, which
I was gonna say drinking. Yes, we all know cops at training. Drinking gets you every time.
Yes, and then poor behavior after drinking, such as slapping a fellow student's ass, getting caught doing something in the drive-through McDonald's with somebody, just stupid things.
That explains my whole Marine Corps career.
We had a highway patrol officer get in trouble for going to training in our city and getting drunk at happy hour and shooting out the parking lot lights with his service weapon.
Oh my God. I swear, I feel like that's in every agency. I've heard that story so many times. It's like, I don't get it. Why don't take your gun out drinking?
Yeah. I mean, that's a general rule, right?
Yeah.
Boys and girls, public service announcement. Don't take your gun out drinking.
For the generation of cops from the 70s and 80s and even the early 90s, that was a shooting out the street lights was a common occurrence. And I went to many classes where I had a couple of LASO lieutenants say, well, I never did it, but I was there when it happened.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of like that teenagers driving through the rural areas, smashing mailboxes with a baseball bat, right? It was that level of shenanigans, I think.
Yeah.
But
their inner child comes out.
Yeah.
Bet you can't hit that.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
But we are not here to talk about people that got kicked out of the National Academy. We are here to talk about a man who completed it. And so, Bill, let's start with this. How we like to talk to all of our guests, and I ask them, how did they get into this profession? If you're a veteran, how did you get into service? If you're a firefighter, how did you get into service? If you're a cop, how did you get into service?
Well, I actually was kind of born into it. My father is a retired police chief.
Okay.
He did 32 years himself. My uncle was a retired sergeant. He did 15 years before he had to medically retire.
Okay.
And then my wife actually retired from our dispatch center as a dispatch supervisor, and after 36 years, and then now she's a record supervisor at another agency. So from a young age, I was exposed to police work. I grew up with cops, military, and construction workers all in the same family. So I was headed in one of those directions, and the law enforcement side grabbed me. And because I was exposed to it at such a young age, I enjoyed it. I learned it, and I never was pushed towards it, but I found myself gravitating towards it. And I was at the police academy at 19, and I became a reserve officer at 19. So I got into it very early.
So did your time start at 19?
When I went my first week as a reserve, I was 19, and I got sworn in before my 20th birthday as a reserve officer.
For retirement, did they count that time for a reserve since it was consecutive?
No. So I had a year and a half as unpaid, nothing towards retirement.
Right. There's nothing to put into retirement, then they can't count towards your retirement. Right. Yeah. Right. Now, I did work with a cop, and he's been a guest on the show. He's a friend of mine. He became a cop and was able to carry a department issued firearm, but not able to purchase his own because he was not old enough.
Yep. And that was me. My first, I was issued my department weapon. When I wasn't on duty, it was in a locked case, and I couldn't carry off duty at the time.
Right.
So it was when I was on duty, I carried, and then it got locked up. And unless I was on duty, it never came out of the case. But I couldn't go and buy a gun until I was actually a fully sworn officer at 21.
Right.
And did I read that right? 112 years of service within your family
right now, it's about 113 years total law enforcement service.
Wow, that's impressive.
That is impressive. I mean, if you combine my service time and my dad's service time, it's still, not even 50 years. So
and actually, out of those 113 years, about 100 of them are with the same department. My dad, my uncle, myself, and for a period of time, my wife worked specifically for my agency. And then when my wife went to a multi-agency dispatch center, while she was getting paid by a different agency and then by the sheriff's office, she still was dispatching us. So we all worked at the same department, but never all at the same time.
What's that like?
You
being
did not work with your father and your uncle at the same time?
No, my uncle retired in 1981. And then my dad retired in 1995, and I started in 1996. So I was basically almost exactly 1 year after my dad when I started at my department.
You couldn't get your dad to hang on one more year, huh?
You know what? The original plan he was going to, but they actually said, a new city manager came in and they said, you know what? You're retiring in 1 year. We'll buy you out we'll buy you out your last year,
Oh, golden
So-
handshake.
The golden handshake. The city manager was able to pick the chief he wanted. They knew my dad was going to retire in a year anyway, so they gave him the golden handshake, and he was 51 years old. He never looked back
Wow.
and retired for
I mean-
29 years happily now.
That's not a bad way to end your career, though. That's like
Oh.
a double dipping real quick. Bam, you get your whole year's payment salary up front, and then you still keep getting paid that whole next year for your retirement. Now, what's it like being a legacy cop? Because I'm not a legacy cop. Technically, I kind of am, but just for a different agency. But what's it like having your whole family, like your grandfather, your father, and then yourself coming on, and then your wife's on? What is that like? What is it like coming on brand new?
Brand new, it was tough because you had people that were checking you out to see, did he just get the job because of his name?
Mm-hmm.
Did he just get the job because his dad was the former chief? So you're held to a microscope. I expected that because I was warned about it. I was warned
Right.
before I knew I wanted to go to. I didn't originally want to work for my agent for the department I ended up working for. I didn't know where I wanted to work. I interviewed and I talked to another agency, and they said, "Why don't you do this in Sausalito?" And I said, "I never thought about it." I went there, and the second I walked in there, I felt the joy I did when I used to go to work with my dad all the time.
Sure.
So I found out,
Amazing.
and then immediately I knew that was the place for me. Even though I had thought later on, I thought about going to other agencies, and life kept me from doing that because family came, different things came up, and I wasn't going to uproot everything. But as a new cop, it was hard because I was judged. I was the baby administrator. I was the baby chief. I was our calls for our department. It was Adam. Adam was our administration. So Adam one, chief's call sign. I was Adam 1.5. I was all these little things.
Yeah.
But over time, it actually people thought it was a cool story. It opened a lot of doors for me because I would contact people in the street, or I would deal with politicians later on, and they go, "You know what? I dealt with your dad. I knew that." And it just made things easier for a lot of administrative work earlier on, and even some of the bad turds I arrested at one time or the other, they would look at my name tag and goes, "Did you arrest me back in 1967?" No,
You're
I
like,
wasn't even
"I'm not
born.
doing it, dude."
That was my dad.
Right.
So it was tough in the beginning, but it was a challenge I had to overcome, and I did. And in the long run, it was a great story. And a lot of the cops I worked with actually respected the story because they would see, hey, you know what? He knows about this department. He is part of this department more than just a badge number.
Yeah.
And I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I had at one point in my career, I was a lieutenant. I never had it changed when I became captain, but I had a portrait done that had a picture of my dad, my uncle, myself, and my wife and our years of service. And I had that hanging in my office because it was something that meant a lot to me.
Sure.
Wow.
And I mean, at least you got to serve as acting chief for 2 months. So you and your dad both were chief.
Yeah, it was, you know what?
You retired a chief.
It's an amazing feat.
It was my department. It was something that I never wore a star. I was the acting chief. I took I'm proud captain. My paperwork all says captain, but when I went out the door, when I was hurt, I was referred to as the chief. That was great. I never got the 4 stars, and a lot of people were going, "Hey, you know what? Why don't you push through, come back?" Everybody thought that was my main goal in my career, was to get those 4 stars because my father was a chief. And no matter how many times I told people, no, I mean, I just want to be a good cop. I just want to enjoy what I'm doing, and I want to make a difference. Everybody goes, "Oh no, you wanted to be you got to be a chief. If you don't become a chief, you're going to feel horrible." When I walked out the door as the captain / acting chief, even though I had a 1.5 years of injury prior to that, so I was in la la land reporting to the doctors, nothing else.
Sure.
That it was hey, I'm retiring and I'm okay with it. And everybody was going, "Oh God," they saw a different side of me going, "You know what? I'm okay walking out the door with half a star." And to this day, I mean, I was very proud of the 2 months I served. I did some good things. I tried to get the department on the right track. Only reason I was the acting chief is because my chief had a heart attack and he went out on medical leave and he ended up retiring as well. 2 months later, my back exploded. So I went out. So none of this was expected. my career goal was just to be the best cop I could be, no matter what that rank would have been. And I was very happy with how it all ended up. And the best days of my career were as a detective or as a sergeant. But I was very proud of being the acting chief.
Well, let's talk about some of those times as a detective and as a sergeant, because some of my favorite times were also as a detective. People who've listened to the show for any length of time know my favorite assignment that I ever worked was narcotics. It was absolutely being undercover and running around chasing bad guys. And because for our county, we had a narcotics task force, and so we worked all the big cases. We didn't work, we worked street level stuff sometimes, but street level stuff typically was handed off to us at the point at which they realized it was something they needed a surveillance team and they needed something bigger to work it. But that being said, there wasn't a surveillance unit. There wasn't, units that were capable at individual departments of doing some of this stuff. They could put together some guys to do surveillance if it was short term, but anything that required an actual surveillance team came to us.
Yeah.
So homicide suspects and violent felons that we were in the area, or we actually there was a caper out of LA. Chuck, I don't remember. Do you ever hear of the Big Money Bandits?
I would have to.
It was a 211 robbery gang. It was a bank robbery gang out of LA that the FBI had the hell of a time, tracking down and finding. And subsequently, we had an informant that told us, "I know who they are." We were like, "Ooh, I'm sorry, what now?" And he was an old school blood out of LA, and he gave us the intel, and our narcotics unit ended up being the surveillance unit that got on him. So doing those kinds of things, I wouldn't have gotten to do if I wasn't in this team of plainclothes guys that were the only team available that were highly trained to do tactical work, undercover work, surveillance work, tracking, aerial photos, trash runs, low crawls, all that stuff. So what was your favorite assignment?
My favorite assignment was a detective, because I had the most to it. In my department, we were a small agency. I mean, we're like 85% of the law enforcement. We are under 50 people. We were actually,
oh wow,
at the largest my department ever was while I was there was 24 sworn. And we got cut. And when I walked out the door, we were 18 sworn, and we only had 16 of those positions filled. When I was
bringing out a skeleton crew.
Oh yeah. So when I was a detective, I was a solo detective. So anything that came through that needed investigation, I caught. So I would deal with a fraud and then go out for a sex assault. I would deal with child neglect. I would deal with embezzlement. I would deal with 245s. And so it was a very
diverse. What's a 245 for you?
Assault with a deadly weapon.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah. So because we are the first city north of San Francisco.
Oh, okay. So I know. Okay,
I'm a
Sausalito in California. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nope, so I know exactly where it is. You're. I'm thinking Sausalito, Ohio.
There's a Sausalito, Ohio.
So
yeah,
it was a small department like ours. Is usually if you're in the middle of Kansas City and you're a department that size, you don't get any action. You don't see anything. But being right next to San Francisco opens up a lot. We had gang members rolling out of San Francisco into our city. We had the assaults. We had the hookers and the pimps coming through. They would get lost. We had the drugs. We had everything that big cities have, just a smaller frequency. So, but when I would get a big case, it would always have ties to these places. So I worked a gang case, an MS-13 gang case, and I was running with San Francisco's gang task force.
Oh, wow. MS-13 all the way up there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
In Sausalito?
They have a strong
MS-13 made it nationwide. They made it to DC.
They're everywhere. They're in Canada and they're in some parts of Europe now.
What?
Oh yeah, it's sad.
Oh, that's farther than I thought. I mean, and I dealt with MS-13, but that's crazy.
Yeah, no, we all think they're just the regular gangbangers, idiots on the streets, but they have tentacles that have gone everywhere.
Yeah, it's terrible.
I had cases in which I did follow up for LAPD. I worked a stalking case in which I had to coordinate with ATF or with NYPD, and I had a large scale embezzlement / arson I dealt with ATF on for many years. So I was able to get a lot of exposure to a lot of different things. And I said, I was investigated everything from a cold case homicide to the theft of a cat. So that's what my range was in my 3.5 years. And it was great because I was my own boss. I reported to a captain, but he let me do what I needed to get done. I was able to go where I needed to go. If I needed to partner up with somebody, I made a phone call. And I got exposed to a lot of things that people that I worked with for years throughout my county, they never dealt with because they just didn't have that experience or that opportunity. So it was fun too, because it was like, hey, you know what? Who says that I investigated the largest theft of wine case in the history of the United States? $1.1 million of fine wine was embezzled from my little city, of a company that was wine storage. And then he went on to do a conservative $250 million arson to try to cover up evidence.
Wow.
So I got thrown into that. And that case he just died a year ago. So that case lasted 20 years altogether. It was fun. And it exposed to me so many parts of law enforcement that later on, when I was looking at climbing the ranks, I had experiences that other people didn't. I could say I worked as part of a task force at one time, not a full-time task force, but a small-time task force. I worked these cases. I did this. I coordinated with the feds. I kicked down doors with federal agencies. It was, and
so awesome.
Yeah, and me and one solo detective from San Francisco Gang Task Force rolled through the worst neighborhood in San Francisco. I didn't realize as a detective I never wore a vest. And I'm going, you know what? I really should have brought one with me here.
Oh, you didn't even bring it?
No, it was left in my office.
Oh, you're like the Swiss Army knife of freaking cops, I swear. And there might be some people out there listening, being, man, that would sound like a drag, or that sucks as a detective have that many cases, different caseloads, because a lot of agencies, they have specialized tables like CAPS, crimes against persons, autos, sex crimes and stuff like that, and like the child stuff and the juvenile table and all that stuff. And to be not only specialized in everything to give a good investigation, all these things. And I think people are probably missing out on the fact that later on down the road, that sets you up for success. Once you retire, you can literally do anything.
Well, go ahead.
That's what I liked. It opened up my doors for now because it gave me a lot of skills, but also it helped me out dramatically when I became a sergeant and I was running a patrol team, because when that call barked off on the radio, and it was like, hey, we have a rape, we have a armed robbery just occurred, we have this, and you have a young patrol team that never encountered a lot of this stuff. You go, okay, this is what we got to get done. And then also being from a small department, there are many calls that you may deal with serious felonies that patrol handles the entire investigation. There's not a detective rolling out to take over once you tape up the crime scene. So I was able to help guide those young officers through successful completions because I had some experience. And a lot of my experiences were not because it was such a great case I did. It was because I screwed something up and I learned the hard way. And I learned, hey, you know what? Hey, this is not what we do here. And
baptism by fire.
This. Yeah. And so those experiences helped me dramatically.
Well, so it's interesting you mentioned that, Chuck, because I can agree with Bill. I also came from a smaller agency as opposed to my father, and Chuck came from larger agencies. And my old man talked to me early on in my career. When we talked, he went for a ride along, and he kind of watched what I was doing and watched how I did things. And he said, you're going to be a much more well-rounded cop than I was. And I said, what do you mean? 100%. And he goes, you're going to have to be a generalist. He says, you're going to do things at the patrol level that when you work for a larger, because my old man worked for LAPD, and unlike you, your dad said, come to my department. And my dad said, don't come to your dad's department. And he said, I would show up, I'd take a face sheet, who's who in the zoo, take a face sheet. And as soon as it was not something that patrol could handle immediately, right then and there, if there was any follow-up investigation to be done, they handed it over to detectives and went back to the next call. And there, whereas my agency, and I'm sure your agency, you catch it, you clean it.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I was able to work rape cases from beginning to end in my first 3 years of patrol.
Mm-hmm.
And, the only things we didn't do, like I talked to the detective sergeant at one point and I said, I have to get this information, and this information. He goes, okay. I said, I'm on Graves. He goes,
do it.
Well, then come in early and interview them.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, oh, well, do I wear my uniform? He goes, if you want, right. If you want to come in early and wear plain clothes and put your badge on and go interview them in plain clothes, go do that and just clear it with your watch commander. You can either, comp the time or adjust your schedule, or, it was like, do it. Like we have only so many detectives, and they have other cases that they have to work. If this is a case you can, so basically to Bill's point, you worked it until you couldn't work it anymore. And then and only then you could hand it off to detective.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's what I think is kind of crazy is that you see a big agency. You would expect not being able to handle everything at a smaller agency because you have less people, right? And less manpower. And then at a bigger agency, you would think, oh, there's a lot more of them. They should be, following up until they can't follow up anymore, and then do the follow-on investigation to all these different people. But it's actually opposite, because the metropolitan areas are just getting so vast that even though it's a massive agency, they're so understaffed, like every agency in the United States. And, luckily the agency I was with, it did start changing its ways. And I got a lot of experience doing crazy follow-ups, but I missed out on so much of a smaller agency. And I was telling my wife this, I think last week, that I kind of wish I would have went to a smaller agency because I would have more opportunity. And when I say more opportunity, it's more opportunity to do investigations from start to finish, having your feet wet in all these different investigations, just, not only theft or rape or robbery, but you got arson, you have all these different things, sex crimes. And that is so invaluable. The older I get. And I'm like, it just makes more sense. And if I could give any advice to anybody getting ready to come on, the big agencies are nice and sexy, but the smaller agencies, you're going to learn a lot more about in-depth crimes in a fast area.
Ground, right? I would say, if you can get on an agency that's anywhere between 75 and 200 cops, that's a beautiful place to be. That's a beautiful place to play, right?
Yeah. That's a good size.
That's a good size. I've worked with smaller agencies, smaller than that. I've worked with agencies larger than that. And I think if I were to want to lead an agency, like let's say I got back, I've always said, like, oh, would you ever get back into police work? And there's only one way, and that would be the Longmire, I'm elected sheriff of like I want to be sheriff.
I can see that though,
with like 3 deputies. And I know, and we all wear jeans and uniform shirts and
cowboy hats,
and we all drive, take home cars that are, all different, like I could do that. Like I would do that level where, you go and they're like, oh, Joe's drunk again and shooting up, his neighbor's fence. And you go over there and you tell Joe, you're going to come and sit in the drunk tank and sober up. And then I'm going to send you home tomorrow and you're going to pay for the damage to your neighbor's fence. Like that's the kind of law enforcement I'd be willing to get back into. But
absolutely,
if you're going to get, if I was young and picking an agency, I would be looking for an agency in that 75 to 200 officer range, because it's big enough that you can go do cool shit, right? But it's not so big that it's this awful behemoth. Like I didn't
still get some good days off.
Oh,
yeah. And you could still do some good special assignments, and you could still, like there's some cool. But when you get into the, NYPD has 28,000 cops. 28,000 cops.
Ooh, that dropped drastically.
And they're short staffed. Yeah, they used to be 35,000, and then one time back in.
Well, it depends on if you count Port Authority and Transit, right? Yeah. So they absorbed Port Authority and Transit, which is what took them up to 50. But but the city of New York minus Transit and Housing Authority and Port Authority and all the other smaller divisions that they absorbed at one point was about 28,000 cops just for the city. And then you take a city like LA, it's at full staffing, they're like 9,500 cops, which is crazy small, but LA's policed differently. LA's policed with cars. And New York has to be policed a lot on foot. That's too big.
Yeah, they actually got up to 98 or 99 1,200.
Yeah, they almost hit
one
10,000. Yeah.
Almost did it. And on the Wikipedia page, they're like, it's 10,000. I was like, you liars.
No, it's not. Yeah.
They were pushing hard for 10,000.
Yeah. It's like LA County Sheriff. LA County Sheriff says there are 10,000. They're I don't know that LA County Sheriff's ever actually hit that magic number anyway. But LA County Sheriff is the largest sheriff's department in, I believe, the world, right?
Yes,
Like,
I believe so.
yeah. But those agencies, my old man said our gear was always crap because to get anything upgraded, you had to buy it for this massive agency.
Yeah.
And so we were always behind. Well, my agency was like, oh, you need a new vest? Go get it.
Exactly.
Like, oh, we need to buy tasers. We'll buy tasers for everybody.
We were able to put gear into the field in weeks, not years.
Right.
Just because go buy it, do what you need to do.
Yes. That's amazing. That's to me, that is freaking crazy because there's so many new advancements in one, technology, and two, gear that you work at a big agency. They're like, hey, every 4 years you get to get the gear that we tell you, and we're going to go with the lowest bidder. I mean, the one who's the best for you guys, the lowest bidder.
Right. You go to Trexpo, you see a new piece of gear, you tell the chief about it. The chief says there's money in the budget, put in a PO, you put in the PO, it shows up, you put it into service. Like that. Like when our agency,
how to write a proposal.
Right. Or grants. We had cops wrote grants.
Mm-hmm.
And they got the money for these. There was a time when we did you guys have 40 millimeter launchers?
We never got to them. I had put in a proposal for it, and we were going to get them, and then our budget got slashed hard.
You're right.
We never got them. They're working on getting them now, but it would have been just if we had the cash, we would have got them.
And that's exactly what we did. Our firearms department, the range masters, the range staff, they said nobody pulls the shotguns out of the rack. Well, I pulled the shotgun. I like the shotgun. And I am also of the opinion that if you're going into a house, a shotgun's a much better choice, but I digress. They put the shotguns, both pairs, they put or both shotguns, they put the less lethal and they put the 12 gauge lethal in the trunk in separate bags. And then in the actual patrol car, they put the patrol rifle and the 40 millimeter with less lethal rounds. And that was it. And they did it by going, we're going to spend money on enough 40 millimeters to outfit every car and buy a bunch of rounds for it. And then we all went into the back parking lot. We all did the training with the 40 millimeter. And it was like, okay, you shot it fine, put it in your car. And that was it.
Yeah. The smaller departments are a lot more flexible because you're able to get the equipment real quick.
Right.
You're allowed to personalize the equipment a little bit better because you're not buying thousands and thousands of pieces of equipment. You're able to make things happen so much faster. I mean, when I first started, only the sergeant had the AR in the back of the car. In a couple of years, every single car was outfitted with an AR, and we had those to spare. We get all our people qualified quickly. We had instead of shared tasers, everybody had a taser. And then it was just dynamic. And then also you would just be handed, hey, you know what? We want ASP batons. Bill, write the proposal and we'll go for it. We want to get in-car, write the proposal, make it happen. Body worn cameras, ALPR cameras, make it happen.
I almost got my drunk chief to approve the FN57 at a wedding reception.
Oh my gosh, that would have been amazing. Dude.
We were sitting there having whiskey at a wedding reception, and I'm like, Chief, hear me out. FN57, 20 rounds.
5.56.
And he ultimately what ended up he goes, give it some time. Let's see how it, proves out as a tried and true round, and we'll discuss it. He ended up retiring before we could have that conversation later. But I mean, that's how you get shit done, right? I wanted to carry a straight stick. I didn't like the PR-24 necessarily, and I hated the ASP. And I wanted to carry a wooden straight stick made out of the old Koga batons made out of diamond wood. And I went to the baton instructor and I said, can I carry this? And he goes, have you had ASP training? I said, yeah. And he goes, well, that's a straight stick. And he goes, hold on. And he picks up the policy and he looks and he sees, it doesn't say anywhere in here that you can't carry a wooden straight stick. Is it wood? And I said, yeah. He goes, yeah, you can carry it. And then that was it. Like, that was the only conversation.
Oh, that's exactly how things were done. We carried the ASP. When I first started, we were PR-24. Nobody ever took them out of the car. I can't remember the last time anybody ever used one. And then we went to ASPs. and we all carried them, but then very few people ever used one. And then some of the guys went, "Hey, I want to get a straight stick," and the same thing happened. Hey, policy doesn't say you can't have it, and you qualified with this, good to go. Just make sure it meets this kind of generic standard.
I'll tell you where I screwed myself over, Bill. I screwed myself over not just getting a SAP and carrying it, because SAP,
my agency banned those.
So LA County Sheriff still had SAPs in policy until probably the late 2010s, right?
Yeah.
They were still in policy, but nobody carried them. They had fallen out of fashion. However, you could still find law enforcement supply companies that had
them. Yeah.
And so I bought one because you could buy it with your law enforcement credentials. And I bought one, and I came in and I said, hey, can I carry this? And they looked in the policy and they realized that it was still in policy. And I was like, yes. And they're all, no. And I'm like, what? They're like, we're changing it. And they I pointed it. I should have just said, well, it's in policy, and I should have just carried it. That's when I learned, don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness.
It was funny you bring that up, because back in we were not allowed to carry them, and it was spelled out because of an event in the late 60s. Well, what happened was we had a little small park downtown, and a bunch of the hippies from San Francisco and the drugged out and the hookers all started hanging out at that park, and it became a little love fest in downtown Sausalito. And it was where they were told, my dad was a brand new sergeant at the time, and they said, hey, you know what? We're going to close this park out tomorrow. We need you guys to clear the park. Well, him and his 3-man patrol team go out there, and they're going, there's about 75 of them out here, but they're all drunk and they're all stoned out of their gore. So they took their saps and they snuck behind them using the bushes and stuff, went behind, grabbed one at a time, smacked them, drug them to the car, loaded them in the car, and took them to jail. Cleared out the park that way. So shortly after that, they said, great utilization, but we're not using this tool anymore.
Yeah. So I'll
wonder what those hospital bills look like.
So I'll tell you.
It was 1967. They never saw him.
Holy shit. The jail hospital, jail word.
There was a guy who worked for LAPD whose last name was Gonzalez. And he had a side business making leather leatherworking in his garage. And he made flat saps. And they came in 3 varieties. The Gonzalez 415, the Gonzalez 245,
oh god,
and the Gonzalez 187.
Oh my god, that's amazing.
And you can imagine the sizes of these things, right?
Yeah.
They were based solely on, like, the 245 was the middle size that most guys carried. And the problem is if you took one of these flat saps and you hit somebody on the side with the side of the flat sap, you could split their head open and all that other stuff. Well, then you had some guys, and this is I'll show you, I think I have a picture of the Gonzalez 245. There was a guy in our agency. He carried a flat sap, and he etched a happy face into the flat part of the leather.
Oh my gosh.
So that when he hit you with it, it would leave a happy face welt on you.
Only a cop.
Yeah, I mean, right.
That's funny.
So those are the kinds of stories that ultimately banned the sap from use. But the pocket still exists, and it's not, knife pocket, flashlight pocket, all those great things. But that was what the sap pocket was originally there for.
And that's I don't know if they ever changed the name of it, but I remember
still a sap pocket.
Yeah, it's still the
sap pocket.
Yep. So anyway, well, so what other besides your sap in the park story? I'm sure you came on a couple of years before I did. You and I got to experience a little bit of the old style policing before it kind of changed forever.
Right.
And you actually came on probably about 2 years before my old man retired, so there was a little bit of that crossover. What sorts of things did you see in your early days that were just like you couldn't do now?
Oh God. Well, let's put it this way. There were not only still Vietnam veterans on the job when I first started, there were still a couple Korean War veterans that were still hanging on.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But there were
Task marks
things
from their wrist to their elbow.
exactly.
Yeah.
God,
Wow.
I remember seeing there was a drunk, handcuffed, non-cooperative guy not getting into the squad car in the back seat, and the sergeant just gut punches him right there in front of everybody, and just pushes him in a parking lot full of for a park that had an entire 4th of July party going on there, and he just decks the guy right in the stomach, pushes him in the car, and then my beat partner stuck his head in there, and the guy before he got hit was claiming, "You can't touch me, I'm a Vietnam vet." Well, my beat partner was a Vietnam vet, 2 tours with the 1st Marine Division over, and he stuck his head in and said, and he was from Virginia, so he had got the Virginian twang, and he goes, "Let me tell you something, boy. You were a loser before you were in country, you were a loser in country, and now you're a loser out of country." And just slammed the door on him. And it was like, okay, that wouldn't fly anymore, the punch or the comment.
Yeah.
I saw another officer get so fed up with a DUI suspect who was talking with their hands, he grabbed the lady's hand and started hitting her in her own face with the hand, smacking her. And then she finally started paying attention, and she went along with the program. There were pursuits over the Golden Gate Bridge at 120, 130 miles per hour, in which they were called out at 80 miles per hour, because the rule was you never say over 100 because you get canceled.
Right.
Yep.
There were, the people, instead of dealing with uncooperative individuals, instead of booking they arrested the guy, and the guy has a bicycle. Instead of booking the bicycle into found property, going, "You were a jackass taking the bicycle and throwing it into the bay." Crap that you could never get around with anymore.
Wow.
And then one, to this day, I don't know how in the world he didn't get caught. We went to serve a warrant on somebody who was probably 80 something years old, and the warrant was like 20 years old. It was about to go bad. And the DA's office called and said, "Hey, this guy has a warrant. You guys better serve it, okay? He did some financial stuff. We're not looking at putting this guy away for life, but we want to get something done here."
Yeah. Judges get shitty when you don't serve their warrants.
Yeah. So this one's been sitting around for, God, this was like 1999. It's been sitting around for like 10 years. And it was just like, ooh, they kept on pausing it. They kept on pushing it, all that little
That's
stuff.
a long time.
We responded. It was a sergeant, a senior officer, and myself. And the guy shows up, and he's got Alzheimer's or he's got dementia. He thinks we're the Gestapo from his time in when he was in occupied France during the early 40s. And it was like, "No, we're not the Gestapo. We're not that." But he thinks we are. We go to handcuff him. He starts putting up a little fight. We get him handcuffed. He turns around and he spits in the sergeant's face. The sergeant then cold cocks this guy right in the face while he's handcuffed behind his back. And me and the senior officer are looking at each other going, "Oh my God." So we start pushing the bad guy into the backseat of the car so the sergeant can't smack him again. Close up the door, and I get stuck having to drive the guy to jail. We get to the jail, and he's bleeding from his lip or something. And the guy goes, "What happened?" "There was a little tussle here." And it was like, "Okay, that's all I need to know." And I'm going, I remember telling that sergeant, "You just put me in a horrific position, because if they were going to go more detailed, what was I going to do here? I'm a 3-year person right here.
Right.
You're looking at retirement in a few years. What the hell?" But there were still things like that in which it was it was street justice. Street justice occurred no matter what size department you were. It occurred more often than you ever saw it. I never saw anybody got seriously hurt, but I saw people get smacked when they probably, by law, they shouldn't have. And then later on, I had some people go, "Yeah, you know what? I deserve that." And then I never saw anybody test a lie. I never saw anybody do any of that stuff. I never saw anybody fraudulently put out reports. But I saw people kiss off reports that they should have taken. I've seen people kiss off arrests they should have made, domestic violence, because when I first came on, the mandatory arrest was still relatively new.
Right.
So there were still people that were, you know what, our boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, it's not a real big thing. The guy do a little
We're
argument.
273.5 you're
Or
talking about, right?
273.5, yeah.
Yeah.
It was like, hey, you know what? And it was like, yeah, we're not going to, there's nothing happened here. And you're looking going, well, he or she has a black eye. And it's like, okay, Sarge, you're the sergeant and it's his beat. But
Right.
So there were things like that. I mean, the old school mentality was still alive and well. And I am a big believer in the old school, but you got to be smart. There's old school and then there's stupidity. And too often, sometimes people do stupidity or they try to act tough instead of you know what, the guy runs, you take him down hard. Okay.
Right.
Once the cuffs are on, things are over.
Right. People like to take that stupidity. That old school mentality and they morph it into stupidity where we can just, assault and beat people for no reason. And that's not the case.
Right.
What we're talking about is you get into a use of force and you're not sitting behind a desk for the next 9 hours writing that use of force. It was, a few lines, X, Y, and Z happened. Bada bing, bada boom. He went to jail. He got a few lumps and that's it. That's what we're talking. We're not talking about.
I literally never, ever got it. The only use of force I got into where it took me many, many hours to deal with the aftermath was the one where I didn't have to write the report because I was listed as the one of the people, it was a shooting, right? Like they read us our rights and they investigated it and I didn't have to cut paper on it at all. But the rest of my uses of force, it was a section in the narrative.
Yep, exactly.
And it was not its own section. You wrote your narrative, and in your narrative, you documented their actions, how you used force, what happened to them as a result, and you said any photographs of the injuries are booked into evidence. And you always told them a joke right before you took the pictures of clean them up, tell them a joke, and snap the picture when they're laughing,
smiling or something. That's it.
Yeah.
But I always like to say is you hear people talk about old school and you look at the old school cops never would do that stupidity stuff that the new school cops trying to be old school do. You look through old school and they'll tell you, hey, there's a line. This is what we do. This is what we don't do. This is what we cross and what we don't cross. There's a reason for everything we do, but everything we do is justifiable and it's legal.
Right.
But we don't become vigilantes. That's not our job. And what happens is bad people that do that vigilante shit.
Yeah, and you talk about like domestic violence calls, right? We go back to the era where women had to press charges against their husbands, right? It's pre-OJ.
Yep.
You can't arrest without a private person's arrest because it's a misdemeanor not committed in your presence, and unless there's a felony, and blah 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 blah. And a lot of times, the women would legitimately say to the police officers, "I love him. He's not normally like this. I just want him to stop hitting me."
Exactly.
And the officers of my dad's era and earlier would take the dude out back, give him an old school tune-up, give him a couple of lumps, and say, "You want to fight somebody, you call me and I'll come back and I'll fight you again. But you do not hit that woman because if you hit her again, I'm going to come back and give you more of the same, just twice as hard." And you know what happened? A lot of times they didn't do it again. What ended up happening was you didn't change the domestic violence laws for arrest, but you took away the cop's ability to lump the dude up and make him stop. Right? And so then you had cops that not only couldn't do anything legally, but they couldn't do a little street justice either. Now I'm retired, so I can say I like the old method. And I've talked to a lot of people that aren't in law enforcement. I say, this is how the cops used to handle it. You beat your wife, they took you out back, they lumped you up, and they said, "Don't fucking touch her again or we're coming back." And you know how many women hear that and go, "Oh my God, I love that so much." I love that so much. Because they understand that like some men just need to have their ass kicked and learn a lesson.
But what happened was some cop somewhere went too far.
Yep.
And just like everything, they always, people trying to prove a point, push things too far.
Right.
or they're insecure about their own capabilities,
Right.
or they think they have to be a tough guy.
Yep.
And they ruin things because anybody who thinks the second a fight is done, that you could turn it off just like that, they don't realize what being in a real fight is like.
Right.
People don't realize that in a fight you have, and if a serious fight with, most cops have been in some, but there's some cops never get into real bad fights for one reason or the other. But you're tussling around with people, you're gut punching them, you're hitting them with the flashlight, you're smacking them against the concrete, you're doing whatever
your life, right? That's a Donnybrook. But see, that's not the same. Like when I talk about lumping somebody up, and I know you know this, Bill, but you lump somebody up, and there was a couple things. Number one, you hit him, you gave him a couple lumps in the stomach, you gave him a couple lumps in the ribs, maybe you gave him a black eye or a split lip, and you were done.
Yeah.
And you didn't hit him with anything but your fists, or maybe you gave him a whack with the sap, right? And they didn't fight back for the most part because they knew, number one, if they fought back, you were going to give it to them worse. And number two, the fighting back in and of itself would give the cop a reason to arrest them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then they would go to jail. So they took their lumps and realized they had done fucked up, and then went back and said, I'm never going to do that again. That was
one of the things that also hurt, where cops started talking about it instead of just going, hey, what's the call? And then they would, look what I did. I did this. I did this.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just, we're 10-7, we're 10-8, we're done.
Yeah. You know, and the FBI came out with a crazy, cool and crazy statistic a few years ago. Says it takes 5 seconds for your brain to realize a threat is no longer a threat. And that pertains to shootings. Well, what do you think if you're fighting with someone and you're in that fight or flight response? It's the same fight or flight response you are in a shooting. So when you realize the fight is done and over with, it's been about 5 seconds. And when you're in a real fight, and it is hard to really break that. There's only a couple things that can break it. One, another officer pulling you off. Two, something funny happens.
Yeah.
And it breaks that tunnel vision, snaps you out of it. So I mean, a real like Donnybrook fight, that's hard to get your bearing. It really is, because you are in a fight or flight response. So
yes, exactly.
But it was those were the things that I mean, like I said, nothing horrific, but just a lot more old school. And as time went by and you had more regulation, you had more reporting, you had more, oh my God, I could get there more. Everybody saw what was happening on the news, and cops started being afraid of using force, even justifiable force, that it's a no-brainer. I'm going to lose my job, or somebody's going to see it and I'm going to complain. Or when you, instead of just including the use of force in your narrative, you have to now do 17 different additional police reports. And when the police got so paper heavy, that's took a lot of initiative away from officers, and being scared because the next lawsuit's going to come down, or everybody always blames 2020 when cops started being not being proactive anymore. But if you go back, you saw that same thing in 2014, in 2016, 2014. You even go back to 1992 with Rodney King. You even go back before that. And quite a bit, but now we've become. And what I also like to say is, when I first started, the chief had final say. It was the chief of the department. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're not going to do. Somewhere along the way, the attorneys got majorly involved. So now you have chiefs that can't make decisions for their own department without running it by some attorney. And even if it's like, hey, this is lawful, we could do it, they're all good. Oh, we'll make the lawsuit look bad. Well, hold on for a second. Who's the chief here? And we got too much attorneys and too much political influence in the job, which has hurt the job in many ways that we're going to see have wounds for many years.
Well, and I also, there's part of that is the civil court system as well, where I look at how many times departments should have told people to fuck off and taken them to court and set the precedent. They're not going to pay, right? I'd rather pay the lawyer fees than pay your ass. But cities said, no. I'd rather pay a settlement than pay the lawyer fees. and they stopped fighting on principle and started fighting on nickels and dimes, right?
Exactly.
And part of that was because of the amount of frivolous lawsuits that were allowed to be filed. And at some point we needed to say, judges too needed to say, no, we're not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
We're going to throw this shit out.
Right. You know, Bill, you brought something up. You said in about 2014 and 2016, the props came out that really had the hands of cops. And that was Prop 47 and 57 in California. So actually, it's kind of crazy that this year in 2024, finally, there's on a ballot to actually bring back felonies for drug-related offenses and some thefts with
petty theft with a
the
crime.
enhancement of 666. Right. Yeah. 666 PC. Get him on that, get him for a good felony, and he's in jail for a year. And generally they're transients and they get off the street and they stop committing crimes. So that's good that some of those things are coming back. But working in those times, I was working in those times, it was crazy. Like, you really couldn't arrest someone. You arrested him, and 5 seconds later, they're out the front door, right back at it again. And you might arrest them again for another crime later in your shift. It was crazy.
Well, it's the revolving door effect, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, especially when you had the distrust of the police, all this horrible freaking politically pushed agendas and changes the criminal justice system. At the same time, COVID rolls around where the jails don't want people in there. And my department arrested 2 felons in a stolen vehicle with a loaded stolen gun in that vehicle, within arm's reach of both of them. Were brought to the jail. They were cited and released from the jail prior to the officer starting the report.
Wow.
That's how bad things got. And it's like, well, we need some common sense to be brought back here.
Well, yeah, that ship has sailed, I fear.
Yeah. Well, here's hoping there.
Hopefully it's coming. Hopefully it's coming back. Hopefully it's
the pendulum swings. The pendulum the pendulum does swing. All right. Well, I mean, we've had a lot of good times talking about what you can and can't do in law enforcement. But Bill, you've written books. Where can people find you and find your books on law enforcement leadership and your thoughts on how to restore leadership in law enforcement? Because let's face it, morale in law enforcement is an all-time low.
Yeah. Well, my book, Leadership in Law Enforcement, 10 Key Traits and What Law Enforcement Agencies Can Do to Develop These and Future Leaders, you could find on Amazon, or you could go to my website, code33consulting.com/order book, and you could order it that way. And what basically I did was, as I was looking to promote, I started studying about the job. I started studying about professionalism in the job. I started studying historical leaders. And as I was preparing to promote and I was going through my master's degree program at the same time, I started realizing there's really no good law enforcement leadership books. You have some great biographies. You got some great war stories. And you got some great funny books, but the art of leadership and the key characteristics of what makes a truly ethical, principle-based leader, there really was nothing that really nailed it down there.
And it has to be practical.
Oh, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has to be. You can't have big, dreamy philosophies. You can't have anything like that. And I ran across a book written for military officers, and it was an author who interviewed a bunch of 3-star and 4-star Army, Navy, Marine, and Air Force officers, and said, "Hey, talk to me about leadership." And they came up with these key characteristics you had to do. So I figured this would be great for law enforcement. So I made that my master's thesis, and then I got a lot of good feedback about this, and so I then turned it into a book. And basically, I took 10 key practical leadership traits that are principle based, that I went away from the autocratic, democratic, laissez-faire, and all these little terms that just kind of describe the definition of leaders, and went into these are what you need to be as a leader. And I got key insights, and based on the experiences of 31 notable law enforcement leaders that go from Teddy Roosevelt to Bill Bratton to John Timoney to Tom Norris, who was an FBI agent and more commonly known as a Medal of Honor recipient from the Navy SEALs and the Medal of Honor in Vietnam. I took their stories and I put them to these traits and demonstrated the importance of each of these traits and what agency and what people could do to use those traits to be better leaders themselves, but also what law enforcement could do to use these to develop their future leaders. And I had 13 key law enforcement officers give direct insights from Bill Bratton. It was after he left LAPD and before he went back to New York PD. Charles Ramsey, when he was still with Philadelphia. John Timoney. Those were the big names. And then I had departments that were smaller, from 20 people. And I put it out there as a book, and it's been endorsed by people such as General Petraeus, Steve Sund from the U.S. Capitol Police, Deputy Chief Jim Dudley. He was from San Francisco PD, and now he does a podcast for Police One. But very big name law.
We just interviewed Jim.
Oh, yeah, Jim's a great guy.
Yeah.
I went golfing with him. We do a golfing run for widows and orphans.
Oh, okay.
Awesome.
They did huge endorsements saying, hey, this is great. And some agencies have used it as part of their promotional process. I've had a lot of people pick it up and read it. And it really breaks down what needs to be done. And I kind of said, hey, I've even had people say, this is what you should read to learn. If you want to know how to go into command, if you want to know how to truly lead people, go with this. And I wrote it not because I wanted to make $1 million. I wanted to get the information out there. I wanted to help cops out there because I learned all from leadership, from stories I heard from people. I mean, I would open up some of those famous books and go, okay, well, now I know what the definition of chain of command is. I know what span of control is, or what completed staff work is. What's that going to help me as a sergeant? What's that going to help me when I'm in the field trying to run with my guys, trying to do something right? How's that going to help me when I run across a big, messy issue and I have to either defend the officers and say, it looks horrible, but they were right? Or I have to go, you guys screwed up. You're going to suffer some consequences, or you may be gone from the department. Right. But how do you do that? And you still do it as an ethical, principle-based person. So that's where the book came from. And because of that, I've been able to present it to international chiefs of police, these concepts. I presented for the FBI's Command College in the Rocky Mountain Division area. I've got some proposals put out to hopefully present for California police chiefs next year, as well as the FBI National Academy Conference. So we got things put out there. I've done a lot of different podcasts out to put this information out here. And that's the most important thing. It's our responsibility as retired cops, as former leaders of our organizations, leaders of the profession, to grow our next generation of cops. Because if we don't teach them about the successes of the past and the lessons learned, the pros, the cons, we're going to have people thinking that everything they did in the past was wrong, everything they did was bad, and we have to reinvent everything. We do not have to reinvent things. Our history is wonderful in law enforcement. There have been bad leaders. There have been bad people that have done bad stuff, but the vast majority are good. And you could pull so much out, and you can learn so much from these people by listening to their stories, by listening to their ideas, that today, what Bill Parker was doing in LAPD in the 1960s could still be put into LAPD today and still be successful.
And should be.
And should be. Daryl Gates, very controversial.
Love Daryl Gates.
And
right.
What Daryl
broken window theory.
Bill Bratton for the broken window.
I'm sorry, Bill Bratton.
Yeah. Dare and SWAT, Daryl Gates.
Yep.
Well, Gates, a little trivia. Gates was Bill Parker's driver when Gates
he was.
Gates,
In fact, if you read Gates's book Chief, it is an amazing. My father's copy of Gates is coming to me when my father, God forbid, one day passes away, because his copy is signed to my dad from Gates.
Yeah.
Gates was an amazing man. It's an amazing book on leadership.
It's a wonderful book. You can't get any better. He sometimes said things he shouldn't have.
He owns it.
And he owns it. It worked in the 80s. It wouldn't work now, but he's smart. He's smart enough to know what he could have said and what could not have said. But as a true leader, he was a person who made sure that the horrible scandals that happened in other departments did not happen for LAPD.
Yep.
If you look at some of the scandals that happened to LAPD, they happened post Gates.
Yep.
But Gates, he was a protege of Bill Parker. Roll up in 1965, Watts riots are rolling. Gates is a 1-star at the time, and he's in the front of lines of officers going down Watts and clearing the rioters out. He's developing tactics on the fly.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, Parker gets on the radio and starts issuing orders, protect the squad cars, do this, from headquarters. Gates is in the field. He hasn't showered in 2 days, and he's going, no, you're messing things up here, Chief. So he goes, you know what? I'll bear the consequences as it is. He looks at everybody, goes, turn off your radios. And so he reaches down and he goes, sorry, Chief. He turns off his radio and he continues pushing forward. And it proves that you have to have that ability to challenge as a leader. And nowadays, people are afraid to do it. You got to know how to do it, when to do it, and why to do it. But you have to have that leadership skill. How many people today have that leadership skill and that strength to turn that radio off and go, we got to do it this way?
Yeah, not very many, I'll tell you that.
No. Bill Bratton, same thing. The philosophies he brought when he first went to New York, it was what detectives don't work nights and weekends. Special squads don't do here. Bad guys have warrants. They are usually at home at 3:00 in the morning. Why aren't you smacking down the windows at 3:00 in the morning? Why aren't our detectives this? Let's change things up here. Let's actually let's let patrol cops work narcs. Let's make them do drug arrests. Right. You have that ability to seek change, seek challenge, and you need to put this mindset. It's like today, well, we don't want our officers doing traffic enforcement. What the hell is that? How many bad people are caught because of traffic enforcement? Ted Bundy is one.
Yeah, easy.
And also
Timothy McVeigh,
William McVeigh. Those are the people that get caught because of traffic enforcement. Son of Sam got caught because of a parking ticket.
Yep.
That is what happened. You do that, you run across stuff. Now you have some police leaders that are so afraid that they're
no pretext.
No pretext. Well, pretext is legal. And even if it's not pretext, even if it's I pulled this person over solely for speeding and I saw the severed head in the back seat. Well, you know what? It is what it is. So I wanted to show people that the leaders from the past have just as much information and can teach the people today. And that's why I put it out there, because there's a great line in a song that said, the good old days weren't all so good and tomorrow's not as bad as it seems. And I turn it around and says, the good old days weren't all so bad and tomorrow isn't as great as it seems. And that's what we need to learn from them, fix what needs to be fixed, but be proud of where we come from. Too often people apologize for our profession. Don't apologize. Acknowledge things went wrong. Acknowledge there were some bad people that wore that badge, but acknowledge how much good we have done. Because if you look, law enforcement has done more good for more people than anything. And it's actually been the pushing car. There were integrated patrol cars before segregation ended. There were men and women of all different colors, all different nationalities wearing the badge, doing law enforcement. There were still Jim Crow laws and there were discrimination against religion. Cops have been doing this job for years and doing a wonderful job at it. And we just got to know when to admit our faults. And sometimes that's the worst thing. Cops don't do that, but you got to learn from it. So that's where the book came from. And that's where I say, hey, you know what? A lot of key leaders have thought it was useful, and a lot of from street cops to 4 or 5 stars. So it's got a large span of people. So I highly encourage people to read it. It's great for promotional processes, but it's also great if you're a brand new sergeant taking over a team, or if you're a brand new chief going, what do we need to do here?
Well, I love that, and I'd be interested to read it. And go out and get yourself a copy of the book, because I'll say this to kind of close out. It was said to me in the context of religion and discussing like the stories in ancient texts, and the quote was, your ancestors may have been primitive, but they weren't stupid. Right. And one of the things that I've instilled in my crew now, where I currently work, is the answer is never because that's the way we've always done it. If that answer is about to come out of your mouth, if you are about to say to me as your boss, when I ask you, and I ask people who've been at my current employer, they've been there a lot longer than me. And I'll say, so why do we do that? And they'll go, well, and don't say it. If you're going to say it, I would rather you say, I don't know. because that's the truth. The statement, well, that's how we've always done it, is a really fussy, gussied up way of saying, I have no idea.
Mhm.
So I would rather you give me the honest answer of, I don't know. And then we can find the truth together and I will just change shit. I'll be like, well, we're not doing that. That's stupid. And I was in a meeting with some department leaders and I said, I just changed it. And they're like, you just changed it? I'm like, yes, it didn't make any sense. Like, well, can you do that? Well, nobody told me I couldn't, so I did. And I think that that's kind of what you're talking about is don't be afraid to challenge, but also recognize where you came from are two tenets. The answer is never and should never be because we've always done it that way.
Yeah.
But also your ancestors were primitive. You know, our police ancestors may have been primitive, but they were not stupid.
Exactly.
They dealt with the same human beings then that we deal with now, and they have something to teach you. So,
yeah.
Well, Bill, we always let our guests dedicate their episode to somebody, and our understanding is you have somebody you would like to dedicate your episode to.
Yes, actually, it was Captain Mark Thomas. He was the captain when I first joined the Sausalito Police Department. He actually, very shortly into my career, he had a on-duty medical incident and died driving home.
Oh.
And he died, and he was somebody I had known for years. There's a connection to the department of my family, but he was somebody when I was having struggles with the police academy. He was fighting with the academy to make sure I was treated right. He was the person that made sure I was taken care of and I had the right right training officers. I was being put with the right people to learn the right things. And he was always a person who put everybody first. And he would work harder for anybody. He would do things. And he would always be looking out for the agencies, but he understood the importance of people. So he passed away in 1997. And it was shortly before I went full time. And it was a major loss to my department, but it was a major loss to law enforcement in my area because he was a stabilizing force. He was somebody who had a ton of experience. One of his cases actually went to the U.S. Supreme Court when he was working for another agency. He was a person that did things the right way. And I see that we named an award after him, but I was the last person in the department who had actually known him or worked for him. So whenever I look back on my career, he is one of those key people that not only got me in it, but kept on pushing me to do better. So anytime I could give credit to him, I do. And because it's also his influence that influenced me to be the best I could be on the job, but also influences me now as I move into my next career in consulting and to teaching, to do things that are right for the officers, do things that are right for the profession, and just being there to make the job easier for everybody.
Yep.
And that's who I dedicate to, Captain Mark Thomas.
Well, rest easy, Captain Thomas. We've got it from here. And as we bring this episode to a close, we want to thank Bill for coming on. Chuck, what do you have for us?
Yeah, well, I want to say thank you, Bill, so much. And I think that book is amazing. There are far too many people in a leadership position in law enforcement that shouldn't be there. They don't question anything, and they can't think for themselves. And I think that every leader in law enforcement or in first responder and military anything should probably grab your book and read it because it sounds like it has a lot of insightful things in there. I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. And if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to follow us on Instagram at war_stories_official and our Facebook at War Stories Podcast. If you're already following, we'd really appreciate it if you would share our posts and help us spread the word. You can also check out the link in our bio on both platforms to find all of our social media links and website. Our podcast is available on all major streaming platforms, including YouTube. If you'd like to support us, head over to our website at www.warstoriesofficial.com and grab some gear. Do you have a story to tell or you know someone who does? We're always looking for law enforcement, corrections officers, dispatchers, firefighters, medics, and veterans, but also those ER nurses and those ER docs to feature on the show. If you're interested, email us at booking.warstories@gmail.com and share your story. We'd love to have you on. And if you know someone who would be a great fit, please send them our way. Thank you for the support. Stay safe.
Once again, Bill, thanks for coming on, and we'd love to have you back. We like having guests where we can just rap and share stories and share experiences, and it goes by fast. And the next thing you know, we've done an hour, and we have a lot more to talk about. So we'd love to have you come back on. But any final words you want to express? Where can people find you? Where can they reach you?
You can check me out on LinkedIn. I am also on Instagram, Code 33 Consulting, and on Facebook, Code 33 Consulting. One thing I want to let everybody know right now, the key thing is we got to be looking for the future in law enforcement, for the future of our people. Part of that is utilizing AI technology to help our people out there.
Sure.
If you're in the streets right now and you're talking to your bosses, what's the thing that keeps cops on the street, off the street the most is report writing. Have them check out Able Police. I am proud to be consulting for them. They're an AI company that is utilizing high-tech technology, transcription software, recognition software, document recognition software, and drawing information from CADs and RMS programs and integrated with them in order to generate police reports from your body-worn camera footage.
Yeah, I've heard about this.
And
That's cool.
A lot of places only do the narrative. This does face page and the narrative. This just not do just some things are more expensive, but also some things only have transcription software. This has recognition software. This has integration with all different CAD systems. This can work with all different body cameras. And also, this is something in which you hold up the ID or identification paperwork to your camera. It takes that information off of it. You never have to write things down. You never have to do any of that stuff.
Wow.
Run your 4-hour
That's really
reports into 15-minute reports. I encourage officers to look at that, talk to their admin about it. And also, if you have questions about it, contact me via LinkedIn or any of those situations. I'll be happy to talk to it. I would love to do a show about this with you guys because there's so advanced information out there.
Yeah,
it's going
I'll
to
have you
help
back.
cops everywhere. So be aware of it. Keep on challenging the system. Do the right thing for the right reason at the right time. And be the best you can be. Be the best officer you could be because you're going to motivate somebody and you're going to help somebody along the way.
Absolutely.
Sounds good. Well,
It's amazing.
We appreciate that. And for the rest of our listeners, until our next episode, come home with your shield or on it.